Okay, well, I'm delighted to welcome our special guest, Rabbi Avremi Zippel, and it's my first opportunity to have a Jewish rabbi with us. His father has been a rabbi here in Utah for how long?
23 years.
23 years, and he is a rock star, gets asked to speak all the time, and so I chose to not add to his burden by asking him to speak, but when I heard that his son was now a rabbi, I thought maybe he's not quite as busy as his dad yet, so maybe he could come and speak with us. So I'm delighted, Rabbi, that you're kind enough to come speak with us. Of course, we always begin with prayer. Today we're going to have a Jewish blessing. You know, there's a blessing for everything. You've all seen from the roof. So there's a blessing on seeing an outstanding Torah scholar. Now, Rabbi Zippel is a humble man, so he would not say he is an outstanding Torah scholar, but I'm sure he's an outstanding Torah scholar. So I'm going to read to you the blessing in English and then butcher the Hebrew, and I hope Rabbi Zippel will correct me when I finish. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who is appointed from his knowledge to those who revere him. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam, shelach mechakmato v'rev av.
Great job.
Really?
Yeah.
Close?
Very close.
Okay, say it right.
Let me see that one. So that would be shechalak michachmato lireyav. Just a few more chaz in there.
More chaz.
More chaz.
Good. Okay. So please join me in welcoming Rabbi Zippel.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you all for the honor and privilege of having me here in your classroom. Before I begin with a couple topics that I was going to talk about today, when your professor came to see me in Salt Lake a couple weeks ago, I mentioned to him, and I told him that I'd like to share it with you now as well, that your professor shared with me the material that you guys covered during the course, and I'd like to say that as a religious leader in Utah, I'm tremendously humbled to speak before this group today. And as I mentioned to the professor, we live in a period in time, in the world that we live in, sadly, where there are many people in this world who are very knowledgeable about religions, and they're very passionate about religions. And sadly and unfortunately, that passion is an excuse for them to commit violence, to have hatred towards other people, to have bigotry towards other people. And passion and knowledge about religion in today's day and age are very often used as reasons and as motivation for very negative things. And which is why it's so refreshing and it's so beautiful to see young people, college students during the best years of your life, who have chosen to take a path in education to be more knowledgeable, to be more accepting of other religions in the world, to accept religious diversity, which as a Jew in particular, right now, as I'm sure you know, if you've seen around the news, anti-Semitism is a hot topic. So as a Jew and as a religious person in general, it's very refreshing and it's very warming and it's very welcoming to see young people who are actively involved in gaining knowledge and in accepting and in embracing religious diversity throughout the world. It's something which I consider to be very important and very crucial, and it's hence I say it's an honor for me to speak before you ladies and gentlemen today. I understand that you have different religious speakers who come and speak throughout the course of the different religions that you're learning, and they come with different PowerPoints or different pieces, items of their religion. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to just briefly discuss what it means to be a religious, Orthodox, Chabad Jew, and I'll break down all those titles in a minute, what it means in today's day and age. I haven't brought a whole lot of material with me, I hope you'll forgive me, and I'd like to open it up to questions, just things, there's a lot of material that you learn in a class. I'd just like to help you understand how it applies in practical, relevant, day-to-day life. And so, let me begin by introducing myself. As Professor said, my name is Rabbi Avremi Zippel. I am a Chabad rabbi in Salt Lake City. Chabad is the world's largest Jewish outreach organization. Chabad has approximately 3,200 centers worldwide that are staffed by, I believe that number is up to now 4,500 full-time Chabad families. And when I say families, I do not mean just rabbis. Chabad centers around the world are always staffed by a married couple. So I was married just over a year ago. I moved to town with my wife in December, and we are the third now, thank God, full-time Chabad family that is on faculty at the Chabad Center here in Utah. There's actually 2 of us in Salt Lake City and 1 up in Park City. So what is Chabad? What does it mean to be a Hasidic Jew? So let me begin by taking a step back for a second. I understand that throughout the course, you gained a perspective into modern Orthodox Judaism. So Chabad is a sect, is a group of Hasidic Jews. Hasidic Jews are predominantly, if not all, Orthodox, meaning that we are observant to the best of our capabilities, and I'll break down the different levels of observance in a moment. But throughout Eastern Europe in the 17th, 18th century, there were different Hasidic groups. Hasidic, the term Hasid in Hebrew literally means pious or a follower. So there were different rabbis that began movements in different cities throughout Poland, Russia, Germany, a large section of Eastern Europe, and they developed followers, and those followers then took the message of their particular rabbi to wherever the world took them. So in particular, Chabad began in a little town called Lubavitch, which is, I believe, now is part of Ukraine. Not even sure with all the annexations now where it falls between the dividing lines, but it was part of White Russia back in the day. It was started, the Hasidic movement was started in the 17th century by a man named Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov. Could be you might have heard of him throughout the course. And one of the branches of the Hasidic movement is the Chabad movement, which was begun by a rabbi named Rabbi Schneur Zalman. He lived in the early 18th century, and the Chabad movement gradually moved through eras of persecution. So it went from Russia, then there was, the Tsarist regime, and the Jews were persecuted throughout that part of the world a little bit. It gradually moved towards Poland and Austria. It's the succession of the Chabad movement, we're talking already after about 150, 200 years, made its way to Vienna. And then in 1940, the 6th Chabad Rebbe, so considering that Rabbi Schneur Zalman was the first Rebbe, the first leader of the Hasidic movement, his great-great-great-great-grandson, who was the 6th leader of the Hasidic movement in 1940, after escaping the Holocaust in Europe, he emigrated to New York, and that has been the seat, the headquarters of the Hasidic movement till this very day. Just as I alluded to, Hasidic dynasties are unique in the fact that they are generally passed down father to son to son to son. Generally, you'll have a son-in-law throwing a slant over there a little bit when there are no sons, when there are only daughters, but Hasidic dynasties are generally something which are passed down by family tradition. So now, what does it mean for me personally to be a Chabad follower, to be a Hasidic follower? What does that entail more than being, in general, an Orthodox Jew? So Orthodox, as I said, we'll get to shortly, but a professor mentioned to me that you guys had had a discussion about peyot, about side locks. It is a biblical commandment that a Jewish man leave sideburns on the side of his face. So now you open up to hundreds of years of Jewish custom. And what you'll find interesting is that in today's day and age, so many differences between different groups of Jewish people are all about customs, how things originated back in the old country. So when our rabbi began our movement of the Hasidic dynasty, what practices did he implement? So as you've seen in the famous video, Ushpizin, which has made Hasidic Jewry world-renowned, there are certain Hasidic groups which their custom is that they have the long, curly sideburns which come all the way down. There's different levels of adherence, chin level, shoulder level, however long you want to leave them, they're long and curly. That is one particular sect of Hasidic Jewry. Chabad does not have that custom, which is why our sideburns are left nice and neat and unobtrusive, neatly on the side of our face. Another very fundamental difference is garb. There are Hasidic Jews who do wear, you might have seen them, you saw them in the movie, they wear long coats 7 days a week. They'll wear fur hats on Shabbat, on holidays. They'll wear the big fur ones, the shtreimels, which are quite a something to grasp onto its own. Again, all of these differences all stem from different Hasidic groups and how those Hasidic leaders chose to pass down the customs through the generations of their movement. So Chabad, in particular, as the years went along, Chabad, when it moved to New York, the seventh Chabad Rabbi, who is the last one in the chain of succession, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who was the leader of the Chabad movement most recently till he passed in 1994, he kind of brought with him the traditional, more simple black hat. So that's why Chabad followers, again, it's not a religious thing. It's not because we think that wearing a shtreimel makes you not religious and wearing a black hat does make you religious. It's purely a question of custom and of what was handed down through the generations. So now typically the majority of Chabad people, Chabad followers, Chabad rabbis that you will see will wear a black simple fedora hat, and they will wear a suit or any sort of jacket and dress pants during the week. In honor of the occasion, I dressed up a little bit, but that's not a custom thing, that's just a personal preference. But again, all these differences all stem from differences in custom, differences in practice, and how certain practices were handed down through the generations, through the development and the continuance of a particular Hasidic movement. So I think that covers Chabad, which we might come back to a little bit later. Just on a side note, the professor mentioned that sometimes if there's questions at the end, if you guys would like to ask questions on a particular topic, I'm cool either way. So if there's a question about a certain issue, by all means, please bring it up. Now, Orthodox. So we're breaking it down title by title. So I am a Chabad rabbi and I am an Orthodox Jew. What does it mean to be an Orthodox Jew? And here's where we get into a little bit more of a sticky topic, I guess one that one could say is a little bit more political, and it opens it up to a little bit more, it's a little bit more argumentative, I guess would be the right word. As Jews, we believe that there was the revelation at Sinai. God gave the Torah, which you may know as the Old Testament, to the Jewish people. Now, the Old Testament, the 5 books of Moses, contain in them 613 commandments, which we believe are the responsibility of every Jew, male and female, to perform. Over the age of bar or bat mitzvah, over the age of 13 for a boy or 12 to a girl, which we'll get to a little bit later, but there are 613 commandments. If you go through the 5 books of Moses, you may find that some of the references to 613 commandments in the 5 books of Moses are extremely vague. In fact, they lack a lot of detail and a lot of clarity. For example, a topic which we're going to get to a little bit later, kosher, which I'm sure is something you probably heard of after having gone through this course. Kosher is a very vast and diverse topic, what it means to keep kosher. The biblical reference for keeping kosher is one verse in the 5 books of Moses, which is actually repeated 3 times with the identical terminology, in which the verse says, "You shall not cook a goat in its mother's milk," period. This is the only biblical reference to keeping kosher. Now, how does one go from not cooking a goat in its mother's milk, which would be the ultimate adherence to a biblical verse, to only eating things which are kosher certified and getting into the whole very diverse topic of what it means to keep kosher? Comes along Jewish history and teaches us that in addition to Moses teaching the people the 5 books of Moses, which in Jewish terminology are called the written law, which are written and biblically traced back thousands of years to the giving of the Torah. In addition to that, there is something called the oral law, oral tradition, which according to Jewish history, Moses, upon coming down from Mount Sinai and teaching the 5, or teaching whatever was what he was up to in the 5 books of Moses to the Jewish people, also gave to them an oral tradition. So Moses told the Jewish people that when it says in the 5 books of Moses, for example, you should not eat a goat cooked in its mother's milk, it also serves to include all these different various complicated laws of keeping kosher. Now, and so on and so on. This applies to each one of the 613 commandments. There was an oral tradition, there were oral details that were handed down, which were not meant to be transcribed. And this is the way that Jewish history went on for hundreds and hundreds of years. About 1,000 years in Jewish history after the giving of the Torah, so we're talking roughly 2,300 years ago, there was a great rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, which literally means Rabbi Judah the Prince. He was a leader of the Jewish people in his time, and he made a revolutionary decision. He said that this whole business of having oral tradition and it being orally passed down through the generations is not going to work. Because at that time, Jews were undergoing persecution. They were being spread out more and more throughout the world. And it wasn't possible to have the entire Jewish nation centrally located in one place, where they could all pass on this oral tradition from one teacher. So therefore, he made the decision to write down the entire oral tradition. He took all of the oral tradition that had been handed down for 1,000 years since the giving of the Torah, and mind you, let's put into reference over here that as the years went on, there were additional laws added to it. Rabbis throughout the generations saw fit to add more details to all of these oral traditions that had been handed down at Sinai. And so he wrote all of them down in a book, which you may have heard of, is called the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the first ever written record of the oral tradition. And the Mishnah begins to detail what are the specific details that until now only had an oral history which accompany each one of the 613 commandments. The Mishnah later developed into another book called the Talmud, which is an interpretation of the Mishnah, and from those sources eventually was written the Code of Jewish Law, which is the Code of Jewish Law, which is as simple as it sounds, is the code to which every Jew should adhere. And so, throughout the generations came different levels of attention to tradition. Very few people, sadly there are Jews, but very few people who are Jewish will deny that things that it says in the 5 books of Moses are true and to be kept literally. Again, you sadly have that minority, but that's pretty much the accepted opinion that we follow the 5 books of Moses. The question is how much adherence is given, how much importance and how much trust is given to the laws of the oral tradition. And so that's the source of where you begin to see different paths and different levels of, I'm trying to think of the most politically correct way to say this, levels of adherence to Jewish law, is how much commitment we show and how much verification we show to the oral tradition. So now, roughly, this is a very, very general description, one would say that there are 3 branches of religion within Judaism. There is Reform Judaism, there is Conservative Judaism, and there is Orthodox Judaism. I'm not going to speak very much about Reform and Conservative Judaism because I don't consider myself to be knowledgeable on the topic. I'm neither Reform nor Conservative, and they're doing a lot of good things in their own way. But let's talk for a second about Orthodox Judaism. So Orthodox Judaism is pretty much the simplest one out there. Orthodox Jews keep everything. They keep all of the 613 commandments with all of the details that were passed down by the oral tradition as dictated to us by the Code of Jewish Law and all of its commentaries and all of its subsequent additions and supplements, etc., etc., etc. So to be an Orthodox Jew in a certain way, from a text-based standpoint, is very simple. Anything which it says, we adhere to. Now, the professor mentioned, we were discussing before, what it is important to note is that a lot, in fact, I believe the number is over 50% of the 613 commandments are not applicable in today's day and age. Being that there is no longer a holy temple, a large percentage of our 613 commandments require a holy temple in order to perform them. There are laws of sacrifices, there are laws of ritual purity and impurity, where a person is able to enter into the holy temple, how the holy temple must be constructed, how the priests and the Levites would conduct themselves on a day-to-day basis. All those laws, to say that we don't keep them is untrue. They're just not applicable in today's day and age as we do not have a holy temple. Being that we do not have a holy temple, we also do not have a high rabbinic court, which would be the final halachic determination of all Jewish laws. So being that we do not have a high rabbinic court, we do not have a court nowadays which can hand down punishments. Now, there are rabbinic courts which could resolve monetary disputes, but there is no Jewish court which has the authority to administer lashes or any other punishment that is dictated by the Torah. So therefore, as a result of that, all judicial laws that apply to how the high court must conduct themselves and punishments for certain sins also do not apply in today's day and age, because we just lack the infrastructure to have them, being as there is no holy temple and there is no rabbinic court which was located at the holy temple. So now that we've discussed what we don't have, let's discuss what we do have and what living as an Orthodox Jew is all about. There are a few very practical scenarios which arise on a day-to-day basis, which I think you might find very illuminating, which I'd like to discuss for a second. One of the biggest, I would say, challenges, I guess challenges is a fair word, of being an Orthodox Jew is keeping the laws of kosher. Now, here comes the real big question. What does it mean to keep kosher? So I'd like to take this opportunity to dispel one very large, very popular notion out there, which I'm sure this might come as a heartbreak to some of you. Something which is kosher does not mean that it was blessed by a rabbi. Rabbis have very powerful blessings, and with our blessings we can affect many things, or so we hope. But with a blessing, we cannot make something kosher. So I've had people who will come to me and say, Rabbi, I'm having a dinner in my house, it's a birthday party, we're not buying kosher food from the supermarket, but could you come to our house before the party and bless us, and then we'll be serving kosher? And the answer is no, because if you're not buying kosher food from the store, my blessing will be great, and I'd love to bless the child who's celebrating their birthday. My blessing will not make your party any more or less kosher. Kosher food needs to be kosher certified. Now the good news is, what you may not know, is that if you walk into your average supermarket, Walmart or wherever you shop, you'd be surprised to know that approximately 60% of normal processed packaged food that's sitting on the shelf is certified kosher. So what does it mean to be certified kosher? How do we get certified kosher? If Rabbi's blessings are helpless, how do we certify things kosher? So for starters, kosher means not mixing milk and meat. So as a religious Jew, we do not mix milk and meat. So that starts from the very, very fundamental hindrance that we do not eat cheeseburgers, because that would require mixing milk and meat in a very literal form. However, it gets deeper than that. In addition to not mixing milk and meat, we do not mix milk and meat utensils. So in my house, as is the case in most kosher houses around the world, essentially I have two kitchens which function within the same room, but essentially there are two different kitchens going on. I have a meat set of dishes, I have a meat sink in which I wash my meat dishes, I have meaty cutlery, which doesn't mean they are dirty and they're full of meat, it just means they have been designated to be used only with meat. I also have a milk side of my kitchen. So there are milk dishes, and there are milk cutlery, and there is a sink in which I wash all my milk-related cutlery or utensils. So in our kitchens, we will not mix anything which has come in contact with meat and anything which has come in contact with milk. So already here you have what poses a problem to many manufacturers who make kosher products. So for example, Heinz tomato ketchup. It's totally natural. It needs to be kosher certified. Why? What could be wrong with squeezed tomatoes going into a plastic bottle and being ketchup? Why does it need a kosher certification? Because in the Heinz plant, in the Heinz factory, wherever it is, on the same equipment where they make Heinz tomato ketchup, they also make Heinz pork and beans. And so therefore, when you see that Heinz tomato ketchup is certified kosher, that means that there is a rabbi full-time at the plant who's not blessing the plant, he's observing the plant. And he is making sure that the materials, the machinery, the hardware, which is used to produce Heinz tomato ketchup is not the same machinery used to produce Heinz pork and beans. Or if it is, it's gone through a proper cleaning and sterilizing and a waiting period, etc., etc., etc. So, keeping kosher means separating milk and meat and only eating things with a kosher certification, which also means that the machinery and the hardware upon which this food was made also keeps to those guidelines of a separation between milk and meat. Now it gets even more complicated. Let me take this one second. Let me just continue with the complications of kosher here for 1 second. Restaurants, eateries. There are certain restaurants that are certified kosher, meaning they only serve kosher in that restaurant. Now, Coca-Cola is certified kosher. Interesting tidbit which you may appreciate. I don't know if you know, Coca-Cola has a secret ingredient in Coca-Cola which gives it its special Coca-Cola taste. There are only 3 people in the world who know of the Coca-Cola ingredient. One, I guess, is the CEO of Coca-Cola. I hope he knows what his secret ingredient is. I'm not sure who the second one is. The third person in the entire world who's granted the privilege of knowing what the secret ingredient of Coca-Cola is the rabbi who signs off on the certification of Coca-Cola. Because you cannot give a kosher certification to a product if there's a secret ingredient which you do not know what it is. So, be it as it may, Coca-Cola certified kosher. Can a religious Jew walk into McDonald's and buy a Coke in a plastic cup? So you have no problem of non-kosher vessels. You're using a plastic cup, which you're the first person to use it, and you'll throw it out or recycle it afterwards, and you want to buy a totally kosher cup of Coca-Cola. Could you do that? And the answer is not really. This is not a yes or no rabbinic question, but the answer is not really, because in addition to the product itself being kosher, there is an added level of stringency. And that is that we will not go into a non-kosher restaurant even to buy or to consume a kosher product. So you do have some Jews who will give themselves the leniency, which this is actually a pretty accepted leniency around the world, that some Jews who are Orthodox will go to a non-kosher restaurant and eat vegetarian. If you're having a work party and they're going to a really fancy non-kosher restaurant and everyone else is having steak, they'll just have a salad. However, as Orthodox Jews, we do not do that. Even though it's just vegetables, we will not do that because A, we do not eat on the utensils that are being served in the non-kosher restaurant, and B, we will not walk into a non-kosher restaurant, period. Even if it's to get a kosher product, we just will not do that. I believe you had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to check. So for something to be certified kosher for
Yes.
any product, so any product we see in the grocery store that's certified kosher,
Yes.
that plant has a rabbi who signs off?
Yes. Now, sometimes in the majority of cases, it does not mean that they have a rabbi who lives on site. My father actually does kosher certification locally here in Utah and a little bit in Idaho, and there are certain factories which, let's say, 1 day out of every 2 months will do a kosher run. So there's a lot of, in Utah it's very popular now, there are a lot of companies that make energy drinks or supplements, all these kinds of, drink this and you'll have wings and you'll fly for 6 hours. A lot of them are made here in Utah. So what they'll do is, the supplements which are made in the drinks, they will do a kosher run, let's say 1 day out of every 2 months. So 1 day out of every 2 months, a rabbi will go to a plant for 6 hours and they'll do all the kosher run, and beforehand he'll check to see the machinery has been cleaned and it's been sterilized. Let me be very clear. A piece of machinery or a vessel upon which non-kosher has been made or cooked or used or eaten can be koshered. It has to be sterilized and it has to be cleaned with hot water, and there's many, a lot of details along the way, but it could happen. So a lot of product, or all products that are kosher certified, at some point in time, there has been a rabbi that the kosher certification company, you'll see a lot OU, OK, usually it's certain letters that have a circle around them just to be distinctive. That kosher company has decided that this company is doing enough to satisfy their needs of a rabbi coming and observing a certain step of the process, that they feel that this product is enough to be kosher. So Dasani water, for a while, had one of its factories here in Utah. And Dasani water is certified kosher. It has a OU on it. And interestingly enough, my father was the one who was actually observing the Dasani plant. So Dasani water that's drank all around the world with a kosher certification is because there's one rabbi in Utah going to a factory once in a while, and that's what gives a product its kosher certification. Okay? So that's kosher. It's a lot of fun. It's very detailed, but that is a way of life. Another topic, a general topic which I'd like to discuss, are laws of modesty, which I think, coming to BYU and speaking about laws of modesty, I'm preaching to the choir here a little bit, but let's talk about the Jewish views on the laws of modesty. So, from a female perspective, this is something that I'm sure all of you could relate to. My wife is not originally from Utah, and neither is my mom, and they have both said that the city, or the state I should say, in the world where it's easiest to go to a department store, to go to any store in Utah and buy clothes, not from a Jewish designer, to go to Macy's and buy a dress that would cut it with the Jewish laws of modesty, is in Utah. Because in Utah, thank God, we live in a state which has great moral values and has a very strong religious population, and therefore shopping for modest clothes in Utah is actually one of the easiest places in the world. So for Jewish women, modesty is covering, there's different levels of stringency, covering the elbows, covering the shoulders, covering the knees. Jewish women, interestingly enough, Jewish women cover their hair. So my wife, my mom, most other Jewish women that I know wear a wig in public. I know you've seen maybe a Chabad Rebbitzin, the wife of a Chabad rabbi with gorgeous hair. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, it's a wig. Yes, Jewish women cover their hair as an added act of modesty, and they wear a wig. Around the house, they just wear a kerchief. It's a little bit cumbersome to wear a wig around the house the entire day, but as an added level of modesty, Jewish women cover their hair after they get married. Now, where it gets very interesting is in the laws of modesty between a man and a woman. Jewish law dictates to us that a Jewish man does not have intentional physical contact with any woman aside for his wife or any of his close female relatives, a mother, a grandmother, a sister, etc. So, Rabbi, does that mean you will not shake my hand? And the answer to that question is yes. Now, I cannot begin to tell you how many, I guess awkward might be the right word, or interesting situations that has led to. For a while, a couple of years ago, Utah had a female governor, Governor Walker, after Mike Leavitt went to Washington, and my father was once invited to an interfaith discussion, roundtable, something or other, with the governor. And there was, 15, 20 people. They're all men, and Governor Arlene Walker was the solitary female in the room, and she's going around the table, and she's shaking everybody's hand, and she's, sharing a thought with them. And so my father's last name begins with a Z, and I guess because of that he was seated at the end of the table. I guess the table went in alphabetical order. And with the entire room watching after she's gone to every single religious member of the city and shaken their hand and sent something nice to them, Governor Walker approaches my father and she says, "Rabbi Zippel, thank you for coming. It's so good to see you." And now what do? Yeah, the governor just extended her hand to you after she shook the hand of 20 other religious leaders. So now what do? Gets a little bit awkward. So my father has, I guess, patented, you would say, has developed a line, a trademark line, which I think works great. He'll tell a woman, to a man I extend my hand, to a woman I extend my heart. Meaning there are ways that I can show you my respect and show you that I have, great admiration for you without actually shaking your hand. But this is a problem that not a problem, this is an obstacle that comes up a lot. A few months ago was Hanukkah. First night of Hanukkah, we had a beautiful ceremony in the rotunda of the state capitol. And so I shared a few words. I come off the stage and the first lady wants to shake my hand. But this is in front of the TV and this is, in the front row of the room. These situations tend to get a little bit sticky. But it is what it is. Jewish law mandates that a Jewish man does not have intentional physical contact with a woman aside for his wife. Now, what do I mean by intentional physical contact? Occasionally, you'll have a nurse at a doctor's office who needs to take some measurements. There, I would prefer to have a male nurse. When I go to the airport and I get patted down, I prefer to have a male TSA agent, etc., etc. But in certain instances that you just can't help it. If you have to go see a female specialist and you have a certain problem and the specialist in the world is a female, Torah is not going to tell you, no, I'm sorry, there's no cure to your ailment because there's only female doctors in the world. So intentional physical contact is avoided between a man and a woman. In addition to that, there are certain laws of modesty that apply to what a Jewish man should see. Sadly, in today's day and age, in terms of social media and advertising, our standards are lowered a little bit. But Torah tells us that a Jewish man should not be provoked, should not bring himself to a situation of immodesty. So for example, there's no longer a WNBA team here anymore, but as a teenager, I would not go to a WNBA game to watch women play basketball. I love basketball and I love sports, and I think that women playing sports and having their own league is incredible. I would not go to see a game because the women wearing basketball jerseys are not dressed modestly, and therefore I would not go watch a game of women's basketball, not because we're male chauvinists, not because Judaism has anything against women. On the contrary, Judaism has the greatest respect for women, and we respect what they respect about themselves. And Judaism, out of its tremendous respect for women, the greatest measure of respect is expecting women to respect themselves. And therefore, as an added level of modesty and as an added level of showing that respect to women, a Jewish man will not watch or will not look at a magazine, pictures, live television, whatever it is, where a woman is immodestly dressed. That's modesty. That's another very common scenario which presents itself on a day-to-day basis. Another topic I'd like to talk about briefly, I jotted down a couple stuff from here, is a lot of people ask, what makes you Orthodox? What's unique? Let's leave all the rules out of it for a second. What does it mean to be a religious Jew? What does it mean to be an Orthodox Jew? What sets a religious Jew apart? And a very fundamental detail, which I think is something which you all can appreciate, is I believe that a religious Jew, or in general, somebody who strives to be more religious, being religious, to the best of my knowledge and in my opinion, is making God a more practical reality in your life. And I want to share with you a story which happened on my drive here. I live in Salt Lake. I was getting onto the 15 to come here, and a year and a half ago, the winter was a little bit different than it is this winter, and there was actually snow and ice on the ground. And on the same on-ramp that I was getting onto to get onto the I-15, I was in a car, and it was icy, and the car began to skid, and I went into a wall. And thank God, everyone in the car walked out without a scratch. The car had quite a few scratches, but that was that. There's actually a beautiful law that's handed down in the Code of Jewish Law, and that is that when a person experiences a miracle, be it a big miracle or a small miracle, but when they go through something which they consider to be miraculous to a certain effect, whenever they pass the location where the miracle happened to them, they are required to make a blessing. As the professor said, there's a blessing for everything. We're making blessings all day and all night, but yes, we are required to make a blessing. And so, this morning, as I was getting onto the on-ramp on 1300 East to come here, I passed by this spot where my car skid, and actually God has provided me with a big enough remembrance that there was a miracle. There's a big black stretch along the dividing wall on the highway, and I made a blessing. I thank God. In English, what I said was, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who performed for me a miracle in this place." And so I think that is one example of what it means to live life as a religious Jew, or as a Jew in general, or as a religious person in general. And that is living a life where God is a tangible reality, where God is something which becomes part and parcel of your daily life. God is not just something or somebody we worship or we pray to or we visit in our place of worship once a week or twice a week or wherever. God is something very tangible in our own lives. And it happens a lot here in Utah that, as a religious Jew, one of the terminologies that's very much part of our day-to-day lexicon is we say thank God a lot. So, this happened, thank God. Or even for, when I'm either man and the professor, I will be there on Tuesday morning at 9:30, please God, with God's help. And it happens a lot that I communicate with people who are not Jewish, and I'll walk into a 7-Eleven and I'll buy a drink. And the guy will be friendly, he'll be like, so sir, how are you? Thank God, I'm doing good, thank God. And the guy will be like, wow, thank God you're doing good. That's fascinating. I never thought about that. You're doing good, you woke up this morning, you're walking around, it's a good day, you came to buy a coffee, and you're doing good, thank God. And people, when you express this concept to them, they love it. They feel it's refreshing, and they feel it's invigorating, and they feel it's a very, very spiritual way to live one's life. And I agree with that. And I think it's something which is very important across humanity. It's not just a Jewish thing, and it's not just a rabbi thing. I think it's something which is very important for people who consider themselves to be God-fearing, who consider themselves to have something they believe in. It's something that I love, and it's part of Judaism, but I think it works across the spectrum, is making God an active reality, something tangible in your own life. Whether that's saying thank God, silently praying every morning, whatever it is. I believe that being a religious Jew, or being a religious anybody in general, I believe that's something which is very central to it, and that's something which could be spread across the spectrum of other religions, and it's something which other people find to be very meaningful, and they have a lot of respect for, and it's something I think that is very, very important in living one's life. Another topic that I wanted to get to before we open it up to questions a little bit is a question that I receive very, very often. I don't usually wear my hat when I'm around town, but people will ask me, Rabbi, what is that on your head? Fair question. What is that on your head? To the best of my knowledge, and I'm pretty sure about this, I actually researched this yesterday, wearing a kippah or a yarmulke, which are different words, one is in Hebrew, one is in Yiddish, wearing a head covering, there is no biblical reference to it whatsoever. In fact, it's not a commandment to cover your head. The rabbis in the Code of Jewish Law have said that it's as a sign of respect, one is meant to cover one's head. A Jewish man is meant to cover one's head. But the question that I receive a lot is, why? Rabbi, why? What's with the kippah? Why are you wearing something on your head? And I'd like to share the general answer that I provide people with. Usually comes with a story. And it's something that it's a message that I feel is universal, and it's something that can be shared by everybody here. There was once a group of high school students, Utah high school students, who came to visit our synagogue in Salt Lake City. And my father was the one who was actually dealing with them. And one of them, it was open forum, everyone could ask whatever they wanted about Judaism. And one of the high school students said to my father, he says, Rabbi, what is with the head covering? Why do you wear a kippah? And so my father turned to this young man, and he posed to him a question. In Judaism, one of our traditions is that we like to answer every question with a question. You'll never get a straight answer out of a Jew. It's our claim to fame. But he turned to this young man and he asked him a question which I'd like to pose to all of you. And that is, and I'd like you to all go through this mental exercise with me for a second. Would anybody here in this room ever entertain the act of committing murder, of killing another human being? I'm going to go with a universal no here, right? Nobody here in their right mind would kill. Why? Why not? I agree, we're all not going to kill. Why? When you think about not killing, what is the initial rationalization for that in your mind? Why wouldn't you kill? I want to hear some answers. I want to hear some reasons for it. Why wouldn't you kill? Yes?
Life is a gift.
Life is a gift. Great. Anybody else? It's illegal. Someone might tell me it is illegal. Anybody else?
It's a commandment.
It's a commandment. Okay. So we're getting somewhere. We're hearing a bunch of different answers across the spectrum. So as it happens, this young man in the story turned to the rabbi and he said to him, I wouldn't kill because it's the wrong thing to do, which I think fits with life being a gift. It's the wrong thing to do. You shouldn't be killing. Life is a gift from God. Who are you to take it away? And so the rabbi said, granted, I get that. I accept that, no problem. But I want to pose to you now a hypothetical situation. He asked this young man, do you have a younger sister? And as it happens, the young man said, yes, I do. And the rabbi said to this young man, I would like you to suppose for a second that one day you come home from school and you walk into your living room and God forbid, your little sister is lying on the floor in a pool of blood. And there's a thug in your house who has just beaten your little sister to within an inch of her life. And there is a gun on the table next to you. Or you know what? Let's even say this man, God forbid, murdered your sister. And there is a gun on the table next to you. Now, you can shoot this man who just did the most unspeakable act to your sister. There's a good chance you won't get any jail time for it. No one's watching. You need to make an instantaneous decision. What would you do? Fair question. It's heat of the moment. You come home and God forbid your little sister is lying there. What would you do? And so this young man turned to the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, I'll be very honest with you. I'd shoot the guy. I would pick up the gun and I would kill him. And the rabbi said, aha, you would kill him. You just told me a minute ago that killing, you never kill. It's the wrong thing. It's wrong. And so the young man said, yes, it's wrong. But this creep just murdered my sister. Now, whether this young man is justified or not, we can all agree that killing in this situation, whether he would do it or not, is the wrong way to react. It's the wrong thing to do. However, if our compass in life of right and wrong is directed by what we feel is right and wrong, by what we feel is appropriate for that situation or not, a lot of times we could be led astray by our own feelings. And therefore the rabbi turned to this young man and he says, listen, I'm not going to judge you what you would have done in the situation, but let me tell you a different reason why you shouldn't kill. You know why you should never, ever, ever commit murder in any instance? Because it is not the godly thing to do. It is not a divine thing to do. We believe that every human being in the entire world was created in the image of God, and therefore it is not a godly thing to do to commit murder. Whether the subject of your anger, whoever it is, across the board, we do not kill because it is not a godly thing to do. And so with that story, with that hypothetical in mind, the rabbi explained to this young man, that is why we wear a kippah. That is why Jewish men cover their head. To be a constant reminder to us that we need to live godly lives. We cannot just do the right thing because we think it's the right thing, because we believe it's the right thing, because we're motivated to do the right thing. We wear a kippah on our heads. We wear a head covering to be a reminder to us that we have a constant obligation and a constant responsibility to lead a godly life. And what God wants, what would be the godly thing to do in this situation, is where it begins and where it ends. And our feelings and our emotions and our thought process are irrational. We need to live a godly life. We need to do what God would want from us and what God would expect from us in any given situation. With that in mind, Professor alluded to this before, in addition to there being 613 commandments, which we consider an obligation on every Jew to observe, there are also, Torah teaches us, there is also something called the 7 Noahide laws, which are 7 commandments, which the Torah teaches us are obligations on all of humanity. Whether you're Jewish, or you're Catholic, or you're LDS, or whatever you are. These are commandments which every single person should observe. Why? Why? Because through these 7 commandments, you are guaranteed that you will lead a godly life, and by extension of that, you will create the world around you to be more godly. You will make the atmosphere in which you live in a more godly atmosphere. What are those 7 Noahide laws? I'd like to run through them briefly if you don't mind. The first is a very basic one, is the obligation to believe in God, to believe in a higher power, to believe that there is a God who created heaven and earth, who is constantly aware of our day-to-day actions, and as a result of that belief, to care about it. There are many people in the world who believe various different things, but what they believe and what they do in actuality are very far from each other. One is obligated, every person is obligated to believe in God, and as a result of that belief, to live their lives a little bit differently. The second commandment, as an extension of that belief in God, is not to blaspheme His holy name, which includes in it the very wide-ranging topic of being aware of one's speech. The professor was telling me when we were walking in here how when he came to BYU for the first time in the 70s, one thing that struck him very strongly is the standard of speech, of words, of terms, of slang you hear on campus, which I would assume, and I agree with the professor. I've been on many different college campuses throughout my years as a yeshiva student, and I agree. I think BYU is a place where the standard of speech is different than most other college campuses around the world, and it's something for which the student life here, the student body should be commended. But yes, the second of the Noahide laws is not to blaspheme, not to curse God's name, but by extension of that, watching what we say, knowing that every word that we say has a tremendous effect on the world around us. The third is one that it's already gotten some airtime in this discussion, is the commandment not to commit murder, which is pretty universal. Murder is something which is looked down upon in any society. The fourth of the 7 Noahide laws is something which is very unique, is one is not allowed to take a limb off of a living animal. In Judaism, we believe in ritually slaughtering animals. We are not vegetarians. We do believe that an animal can go through a process of becoming kosher. But just coming back to the entire kosher discussion, we discussed separating milk and meat. In order for meat to be kosher, there's a whole nother process in order for the meat to be kosher. So you could have a totally separate milk and meat kitchen, but meat needs to be kosher. The meat needs to be ritually slaughtered. So though we believe that one could consume meat from an animal by ritually slaughtering it, there is a prohibition, again a universal prohibition, about animal cruelty. In particular, the way God articulated it to us is not taking a limb off of a living animal. It's brought down in historical fact that in the time of Noah, which was, we're talking thousands of years ago, the culture in that time believed that to take a limb off a living animal was actually very tasty because the blood that was part of the piece had a lot of vitality in it because the animal was still alive. So therefore, when the law was passed down, it was that one is not to take a limb off a living animal, but by extension, animal cruelty, to respect every single creature on God's good earth, that each and every single one of them has a place here, and not, God forbid, to be cruel to any living being. The fifth is the commandment and the obligation to set up a judicial system. God gives each and every single person a commandment and an obligation to live their lives in a way that is dictated by laws. You should live in a society where there are laws, where those laws are enforced, whether you like the political parties that are making those laws or not, whether you agree with them. You should live in a society where there are laws and where those laws are carried out, because that pretty much guarantees that your behavior as a result of those laws will be affected as a result of that in a positive fashion. The sixth is the prohibition against any acts of sexual immorality, which are pretty open-ended across the spectrum. That means, first of all, being committed to one's marriage. One man should marry one wife, and that marriage should be absolute. That should be the only relationship between that man and that woman forever and ever. And that extends across the spectrum. And last but not least, which is also, I think, which is something which could be very much appreciated, is the prohibition against lying, stealing, and cheating. About being honest. Again, creating a godly atmosphere in this world where respect for one's fellow man or fellow woman, or respect for fellow members of humanity, respect for their possessions is honored and is treated with integrity, and is something which is valued very, very much. And so Torah teaches us that these 7 laws are expected to be carried out by all of humanity, with the motivation and with the hope and with the message that these laws will create a more godly world. Will create a world where God's presence, where the presence of positivity and the presence of goodness is more felt, is more tangible, and as a result of that, humanity that are living in that society and in that culture, by extension of that, will lead and live more godly lives. Yes?
Seeing that there is a lot of different levels of observance among Jews, is there a belief, different reward in heaven? What is your idea of heaven? Okay,
that's a great question, which I want to touch on for a second. A lot of times I'll get a question, does Judaism believe in hell? Sadly, there are sinners in this world. What happens to them? Where do they go? And so, let me be very clear on this one. Judaism does not believe in hell. Judaism does not believe that there is a place of eternal punishment where all bad people go after they live their life in this world. Rather, Judaism believes that every living thing has a soul. That soul, whether a person is in touch with it or not, that soul has a godly mission that was given to it. That soul is then enclosed in a physical body, and that soul does everything to the best of its capabilities to fulfill its godly mission in this world. The problem is that sometimes one's physical body, and by physical body I don't just mean the actual body, but I mean the physical life which the person leads with a soul and a body trying to work in harmony, isn't very harmonious. And a lot of times the life which a person leads is not in sync with what his soul wants. And therefore he does things in this world which may not be in sync with the will of his soul, and by extension with the will of God. And so what happens after a person like that leaves this world? Jewish tradition teaches us that the soul is sent to a place called, for lack of a better word in English, purgatory. And in purgatory, the soul undergoes a cleansing process. Not a punishment process, but a cleansing process. If you eat dinner and you have dirty dishes, and now you'd like to put the dishes back away in your fancy china cabinet where your dishes belong, there's a problem. Your dishes are filthy. So, are you punishing your dishes by putting them in the dishwasher? Are you saying, bad dishes, you've misbehaved tonight by dinner, you've gotten yourselves all dirty, you're going for a punishment now of a spin cycle? No, you're cleaning them. Right now, they're not the way they ought to be for you to put them away in your fancy cupboard. So therefore what you need to do is, you need to wash them. You need to clean them. You need to rid them of all foreign substances which have clung to your dishes. Once they come out of the dishwasher fresh and sparkly as new, they're ready to go be put away back again in that cupboard. And so that is Judaism's view on the afterlife. Souls don't receive eternal punishment. Souls need to be cleansed for certain experiences they may have gone through in this world. Could be, sadly, there are some souls that need to go through a very, very rigorous cleansing process because there's been a lot of stuff which has stuck to their soul during its term in this world. But ultimately, there is no such concept as eternal punishment and banishment for sinners to a place where there's no hope for them. Yes, brother?
Is the Hebrew word Gehenna?
Gehenna, yes. Yes. Yes.
So would you say everyone receives the same reward?
At some point, after some sort of cleansing, yes. And if you've done more good in this world, make no mistake, one soul will be elevated to greater spiritual heights and it will enjoy greater reward. Meaning everyone will receive some sort of reward. The question is how much cleansing it needs to go through beforehand before it's capable of receiving that reward, and how much good and reward it will receive in the world to come. But yes, every soul is guaranteed some sort of reward in the world to come. There is no such thing as eternal doom. Do we have any other questions?
So that particular teaching, I've talked with a lot of Jewish folks about the afterlife, and I've heard all kinds of things.
Sure.
To what extent is that a Chabad or a Hasidic answer versus, because often I've heard, well, there's different views.
It is more of a, it is a view that has more of a Hasidic influence on it. So, the Hasidic philosophy is one that deals extensively with the coming of the Messiah, with the coming of the Mashiach, and what the world will be like after the coming of the Messiah. A lot of Hasidic teachings is one movement of Judaism which puts a lot of emphasis on the afterlife and on souls and kind of delves a lot into the spiritual side of things. So yes, that is a view which is very heavily influenced by Hasidic teachings, but which is very factually backed up based on Jewish historical sources going all the way back to the 5 books of Moses, that there is no such thing as eternal punishment and as eternal doom and gloom. Are there any other questions, or should we perhaps move on to a different topic? I'm trying to think of what else. I want to talk a little bit about the Jewish life cycle. Just, something which you might appreciate as younger people growing up as a religious Jew, different steps and milestones along the way. So one thing that's we'll start from the very, very beginning. When a Jewish mother is pregnant with a child, Judaism teaches us that, let me back up a second. The Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the seventh Chabad Rabbi of the Chabad movement, who we quoted before, had a very, very famous teaching, I guess I would say. There's a one-liner he loved going back to. There was once a Jew who approached the Rebbe, and he said that, I believe he had a child who was 9 years old, and he had a problem that his child wasn't interested in going to religious school. And he made a comment to the Rebbe, something along the lines of that, Jewish education starts now at the age of 9, and I'm not sure where he got the number 9 from, but Jewish education begins now at this age, and my son is not going along with the swing of things. And the Rabbi said, I'm sorry to tell you that you're a little bit mistaken. Jewish education does not begin at the age of 9. And so he backpedaled. He said, oh, I'm sorry, Jewish education begins at 5. And he says, no, sorry. Strike one, not 5 either. So the guy says, Rabbi, you must mean that Jewish education begins at the age of 3. And he said, nope, strike 2, not 3 either. So the guy said to the Rebbe, you mean to say that Jewish education begins at birth? And the Rebbe said, nope, very sorry. Jewish education begins in the womb. So one of the very fundamental views of our lifestyle is that when a Jewish mother is pregnant with her baby, the influences on the fetus while it's in the womb are of extreme importance. And which is why in the Jewish faith, when a mother is pregnant after she begins about her third or her fourth month, once the fetus is a little bit more, viable and more receptive to things, Jewish faith is of the belief that a pregnant woman or a pregnant mother should be very careful where she goes and what she exposes her fetus to, because in our belief, there's no such thing as having too early of an influence on a Jewish child or on any child. Education is a very important part of our lives, and we believe that begins from the very, 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 very beginning. When a Jewish child is born, as I'm sure you may know, after 8 days, a Jewish boy is circumcised by a rabbi. A Jewish girl receives, at which point a Jewish boy, by his circumcision, receives his Jewish name, which is given to him at the circumcision ceremony. A Jewish girl is given her Jewish name at usually the first Shabbat, the first Saturday after her birth. Her father will be called to the Torah, he'll receive a special honor, at which point the rabbi will make a blessing and give this young lady her name. See, rabbi's blessings do work for some things. We're able to give names. We can't make food kosher, but we can give names. And then Jewish children grow up. So what's interesting is that a Jewish boy, tradition teaches us, does not have his first haircut until the age of 3. So I personally was raised here. I wasn't born here, but I was raised here. And this is one of my earliest memories. I used to hate going to the supermarket with my mother, and I had really, really long hair at the age of 3. And it was very straight, and for lack of better option, my mother used to put it in a ponytail, because otherwise it would be everywhere. And we used to go to the supermarket, and everyone would say, "Oh, ma'am, your daughter is so cute," and I'd be like, "I'm a boy," but that's just one of the challenges, I guess, of growing up as a Jewish religious child. So a Jewish boy has his first haircut at the age of 3. Jewish mysticism teaches us that a Jewish child is compared to a tree. And back in the days of the Holy Temple, when a person would plant a tree, the fruits of the tree for the first 3 years were considered to be sacred. They were brought to the Holy Temple and they were given to the priest to show that in your thankfulness and in your gratitude to God, God helped you plant a tree. The first 3 years are considered a gift to God. So a Jewish boy has his first haircut at the age of 3, which is called an upsharon. I'm not sure if you guys covered that or not, but that is one of the customs. Jewish childhood progresses until the age of bar or bat mitzvah. And this is actually, once we're already getting into it, we may as well touch on this topic. In the Jewish faith, a young Jewish girl is considered to be a minor until the age of 12. A young Jewish boy is considered to be a minor until the age of 13. And when I say minor, I don't mean that in the Jewish faith we can drive or vote or serve in the army at the age of 12 or 13, but we're considered to be a full-fledged Jewish adult, meaning that in the Jewish faith, a Jewish girl over the age of 12 or a Jewish boy over the age of 13, once they reach that milestone birthday, 12 or 13, they are considered to be competent enough and liable for their own actions. So after a bar or bat mitzvah, a young Jewish boy or girl will begin fulfilling all of the commandments on their own. They are considered to be a full-fledged member of the Jewish nation. Comes along contemporary Jewish thought, and says that this is sexism. This is not being fair to women. How dare you say that we're discriminating against females by saying that they should have their bat mitzvah at the age of 12 and boys should have their bar mitzvah at the age of 13. Just to put in reference, bar in Hebrew means son and bat means daughter. So bar mitzvah means the son of a mitzvah. When a Jewish boy becomes obligated in a commandment, mitzvah is a commandment, and a bat mitzvah means the daughter of a mitzvah when a Jewish girl becomes obligated in commandments. So be it as it may, comes modern contemporary thinking and says, we're discriminating against Jewish girls by telling them that their bat mitzvah should be at the age of 12 instead of 13. So therefore, different branches of Judaism have annulled. They've scrapped this one. They've taken out the bar and bat mitzvah, and they have created a joint concept called b'nai mitzvah. B'nai is a word which works in both genders. As I'm sure you may know, in Hebrew there are different words that are in the male tense and in the female tense. So b'nai is across the board. B'nai means children both in the male and the female, and they have decided that Jewish children receive together their bar or bat mitzvah or b'nai mitzvah both at the age of 13. If you think about it for a second, what is the Torah communicating by telling us that a Jewish girl should have her bat mitzvah at the age of 12? As we discussed, what is a bar or bat mitzvah? A bar or bat mitzvah means that the Torah considers this young man or woman to be mature enough and competent enough to be responsible for their own actions. So when the Torah tells us that a young Jewish woman should have her bat mitzvah at the age of 12, and a young Jewish man should have his bar mitzvah at the age of 13, the message which the Torah is communicating to us is that in the Torah's view, a young Jewish woman reaches maturity a year before a boy. A young girl is considered to be a full-fledged adult in the Jewish nation at the age of 12. Boys were always a little bit slower developmentally, so therefore they have to wait till 13. So if you think about it, making a bat mitzvah at the age of 12 is the biggest tip of a hat which Judaism could give to the female gender by saying that yes, you young ladies reach maturity a year before your male counterparts. For some reason, that notion hasn't gone over in certain factions of Judaism, but in Orthodox Judaism and I would say, I think in the majority of Judaism, a young Jewish woman reaches adulthood at the age of 12, and a young Jewish man reaches adulthood at the age of 13, bar and bat mitzvah. Jewish life continues until one's wedding. And this is, a lot of times people will get to know me a little bit and they'll say, Rabbi, I have a very embarrassing question for you. Uh-oh, what's your very embarrassing question? Did you have an arranged marriage? People will ask me, yeah, you're a rabbi, you're a Chabad, did you have an arranged marriage? And I will say to them, of course I did. I said, really? Yeah, of course. In New York, there's a rabbi who sits in a big room full of computer screens, and he has a long white beard, and he wears a long black coat. And every morning he wakes up, and he has divine inspiration, and he looks at the boys' screen, and he says, okay, profile number 3567 and girl 2498, they should marry each other. And I receive an email in my inbox saying, congratulations, you're marrying this girl, your wedding will be on this and this date, please show up with a smile on your face. And they're like, really? I'm like, no, that is not what happens. Sadly, people think that might happen, but that is not what happened. So, did I have an arranged marriage? Let me tell you what happened to me, and let me tell you why I think this is very, very common. When I was 13 years old, I did not get married at 13, no. When I was 13 years old, I left home. I moved out of town. I had been homeschooled up through 7th grade, as there is no Jewish school here in Utah. I was sent to a yeshiva high school in Illinois for 3 years. I was in a yeshiva college for 3 years overseas in England. I was in school for 1 year in Brooklyn, and then I was ordained. I went to a yeshiva in New Jersey where I received my ordination. I went through the process of testing and examinations which are necessary to be ordained as a rabbi. While I was in my last stop along the yeshiva system, when I was in the Rabbinical College of America in Morristown, New Jersey, one of my teachers in school, who I guess developed a certain liking to, had a younger sister. And after I graduated from the school, called his mom, which is now my mother-in-law, and said to her, I think that my younger sister, your daughter, should go out with this guy. And so his mom called my mom, and it was all set up, and my wife and I were suggested that we should date. We were not informed that we were getting married. It was merely suggested by somebody who knew both of us fairly well that perhaps we would be a good match for each other. We dated, and together, the two of us, independently, without any outside influence of any rabbis, came to a decision that we should get married. This is the story of my marriage. So if you would like to consider that an arranged marriage, I guess you could call it an arranged marriage. I think that in today's society, somebody matching up a guy and a girl is not so uncommon, but for some reason in Chabad we have a rap that we have arranged marriages with a rabbi with a long white beard matching up boys and girls. That does not happen. That did not happen. And no, I did not have an arranged marriage. I think the proper term is I had a suggested marriage, which I think is pretty common in today's day and age. The Jewish wedding, which I don't believe is in Jewish Pizan, it's right after the wedding, but the Jewish wedding is something which is fascinating. There's a lot of different Jewish custom, a lot of Jewish mysticism involved in the entire process of a Jewish marriage. In fact, just to share with you a little bit of Jewish mysticism, Jewish mysticism teaches us actually, as we're getting back to the soul conversation, that every living being has a soul. So Jewish mysticism teaches us that when whichever spouse was born first, his soul, or his or her soul, descended into this world, and shortly before it was enclosed in his or her body, it was cut in half. And so the person receives their soul, which in truth is only half of a package set. The other half of the soul is then enclosed in their spouse's body whenever their spouse is born, whatever the age gap is between husband and wife. And so Jewish mysticism teaches us that a wedding is actually a reunion. It's a union of souls. It's one soul, which however long ago it was that you were born, was whole, and then subsequently it was cut in half, and you got half, and your spouse got half, and by the wedding ceremony, your soul is bound together, which is a very, very beautiful concept. The wedding is something which is very fundamental in Jewish teaching, as it is also, and this I'm pretty sure you guys covered, it's the beginning of the family process when husband and wife begin keeping the laws of family purity, which leads into the whole discussion of raising children, and the wife being essential in the household. And I'd actually like to conclude with that thought, speaking to a predominantly female crowd. A few weeks ago, after we moved to town, my wife and I were making our first Shabbat dinner, our first Friday night dinner celebrating the Shabbat. And I don't know if you guys know, Channel 5, Carol Makita, who was the religion reporter for a while, heard that we moved to town, and she wanted to come and do a story on how a young Jewish family prepares for Shabbat. And so she came to my house on a Thursday night, and she came with a video guy, and they come in. And Carol Makita says to me, she says, "Okay, Rabbi, do your thing. You're on TV, here's your mic. Go prepare for the Shabbat, do what you gotta do." I said, "Carol, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not going to be doing very much over here. It's actually primarily going to be my wife. Preparing for Shabbat, there's a lot of cooking involved, and yes, I'll get a few of the ritual stuff prepared, but a lot of it's going to be my wife." And so Carol turns to me and she says, "Rabbi, I don't get it. Aren't you a rabbi? Shabbat is a religious thing. Aren't you the rabbi here?" I said, "Yes, indeed I am. But here is where I believe is a very fundamental misconception about Judaism, which I'd like to dispel to her and I'd like to dispel to you." And I said, "You're correct in assuming that as the rabbi, I would be the one running the show, if you go with the misconception that the most important place in Judaism is the synagogue. If you stop a random Jew on the street and you say to him or her, where is the most important place in Judaism? The synagogue. After the synagogue, the rabbi's office. We're talking, holy places of worship. And sadly, I'd like to say that that's not true. The most important place in Judaism is the Jewish home. It begins and it ends with that. The most important place in Jewish culture is the home where our children are educated, where they're given an appreciation for their heritage, where their religious life begins. The most important place in Judaism is the Jewish home. And in the Jewish home, the one who is entrusted and the one who God gives the trust that they are going to be the ones to raise a Jewish family is the Jewish mother. And so I said to Carol, I said, you'll encounter a lot in this world, this notion that in the religious world, the Jewish woman is chained to the kitchen counter, and the only thing she's meant to do is care for her kids and bathe them and just cook meals, in the hundreds, and her husband goes out and is the big rabbi. I said it's so untrue, and that's what I'd like to finish off with you young ladies today, is I believe it's the same. I mean, that in my take, that is religious life. As a rabbi, yes, I'm the rabbi, and I teach, and I speak, and I counsel, and I lecture, but in my mind, the most important person in my family, and my family being, to me, the closest thing to my heart, is absolutely my wife, and I believe it's the same in any house in Jewish culture. The Jewish home being the primary center of Jewish life of the entire family is run by the Jewish woman, who is the primary source of ensuring that Judaism will continue throughout the future generations. Any questions? I think we're done.
Please join me in thanking Rabbi.
Thank you very much.